Hey everybody, welcome back to the Flat Iron Tuning Question of the Week. This week, our question comes from the entire internet, which blew up about the new Cobb Green Speed update.
Yes.
Let's just dive right in, get to the most obvious thing. Does this affect my access port?
Right. So the very important first thing to note is what Cobb changed is the Access Tuner software. The software set the tuners use to create new maps. It didn't affect or have anything to do with existing access ports or existing tunes. So if you have your access port, if you have a tune on your car, it doesn't affect any of that. The only thing that the Cobb Green Speed update is going to affect are new maps that are created by pro tuners after the Green Speed update. Take this for what it's worth, but I've been assured by Cobb that you can plug your access port into Map Manager and all sorts of stuff, move your maps around. Existing maps are not going to be affected. Map Manager is not going to be affected. It's only the Access Tuner software that is used to create new tunes that is affected.
So that's useful for someone like Scotty who is running with NASA and can only have one map loader on his car at a time.
Right.
That's still going to work for him, even though those maps already exist. He'll just swap them in and out. No problems there.
The maps already exist. He can move any one of those maps back onto his computer, back onto the access port. I have been assured that that is not going to be affected.
Excellent. Good news.
Yes. That's a good positive. It's a good way to start.
Okay, so let's get into what parts are going to affect new tunes going forward then. Intakes, yes. Your car can still be tuned for an intake. Now there's a small asterisk there, and we'll get back to that at the end. But yes, your car can be tuned for intake, and it should not have any check engine lights or anything like that. Something else everybody has or talks about wanting air oil separators.
Air oil separators, if you're basically using this street configuration or a configuration that basically keeps everything connected as it was from the factory, you didn't need a tune for it before, you don't need a tune for it now. If you're doing something, with a motorsports application where it's going to be a vent to atmosphere setup, that could still be tuned for, and it shouldn't cause any check engine lights or anything like that, even with the new configuration.
What about like a catback exhaust?
Catback exhaust, those are mostly a change in noise. They're not enough of a change in anything to require tune. Didn't require tune before, don't require tune after. So no effect there.
Okay. Downpipes.
That has changed because you're affecting the catalytic converters. That is now something that tuners do not have access to. So you can put a downpipe on your car. It can be tuned for it, but the tune cannot turn off any of the check engine lights. So you would almost certainly have a check engine light for putting a downpipe on. A lot of the manufacturers are trying to use Jesse cats that basically clean up the exhaust as effectively as an OEM cat. If the cat is good enough that it would not throw a cat inefficiency check engine light, then it would be able to be tuned completely normally if that is allowed where you are. For instance, here in Colorado, that is now actually not allowed. So in theory, if you have a good enough cat, you could tune the car and everything would be basically normal, but it's hard to know whether or not you'd have that check engine light or not.
What about aftermarket turbos?
That should be able to still be tuned for just as before. Now here's where the asterisk comes in about the intakes. So one of the things that Cobb has said is now no longer available is you cannot change the maximum value set for the mass airflow sensor. So it's possible if you have if it's just a simple bolt-on turbo, then everything should be fine. But if you're going for big power now, because you cannot increase the maximum value that the mass airflow sensor can read, there's going to be some point where the turbo is pulling in more air than whatever that maximum value is, and then that's where the ability to use the access port with the new parameters would kind of break down. Don't know exactly where that point is yet. Don't know if it will even come up, but that is one of the things that Cobb specifically mentioned in the Green Speed update is that maximum mass airflow sensor value cannot be changed. But for instance, Cobb's 20G is CARB approved even. So the CARB approval, what that means is that part has to be able to be installed on the car, not require any kind of tuning at all to function, and not increase any emissions. So and they have that CARB approval for that turbo for a number of models of STI. So that turbo should be fine. Which I would assume then turbos in the 20G family, maybe a little bit bigger would be fine. It's just like for big power numbers, that's where we get into a little bit more of an X factor.
None of that stuff would throw a check engine light before. None of that stuff is going to throw a check engine light now.
Theoretically, no. I'd say that, like, you put on a bigger turbo, the car wouldn't run properly, but it wouldn't necessarily throw a check engine light in and of itself just because you put on the bigger turbo. It might throw a check engine light for like a misfire because, the fueling was too rich or too lean, but, that's something that could be tuned for. That's something that can still be tuned for. It's not one of these check engine lights that is now basically walled off from tuner's access.
The Green Speed update is mostly for emissions-related components.
Right. So the big difference between the check engine lights that are no longer accessible to the tuners and things like a misfire code is, so misfire code is generated, a check engine light that's generated because of a fault or a running issue. Versus like any of the emissions devices, that check engine light is because the part is no longer present or not seen to be functioning properly. The tuners now no longer have access to any of the check engine lights for a part that is either not present or a part that is not functioning properly. If it's a check engine light for a running functioning issue, basically you can tune to correct so that there's not a functioning issue to the engine. You just can't override these check engine lights directly. So basically, once the tuner gets the car or the engine to run properly, like if you had a misfire code or you're running too rich or too lean, once you tune the ECU to correct that rich or lean condition, then the check engine light would go off. You cannot just go in there and say that they cannot access any of the check engine lights related to a part that is not present or not functioning. You can't say this part that should be there is there, where they had access to that before. Now it's completely walled off. They don't have access to that.
And you're talking about TGV deletes, secondary air pump deletes, EGR.
Yeah. So in some cases, your car could still be tuned with those present. You would just have the check engine light on. So basically, the end result of the tune, like say you had a completely stock car and you put on TGV deletes. The tune of the car before the Green Speed update and the tune of the car after the Green Speed update, in theory, in that very basic situation, could be done in the same manner. The only difference is now they cannot touch any of those check engine lights, so the check engine light will still be present. To try and figure out how this affects you, if you have to pass emissions, I mean, the simplest answer is if you have to pass emissions, you can't do any of these things. But basically, if you can pass emissions with the check engine light or not, and which in most places that are checking, you can't, well, then that's where now TGVs are no longer an option because they would throw the check engine light. The other X factor that we need to explore more, which is what we kind of talked about in the podcast, is, with the newer cars that are on CAN bus, where everything is connected and the car knows, all the systems know any system that is not functioning properly, how likely are you to end up in limp mode if you have one or multiple systems that are having an issue? And that's where we don't have a solid answer on that now. So it's possible, like if your car has, TGVs and EGRs and you remove both of those, that might actually put the car into a limp mode. So then it doesn't matter that you might be able to tune fueling and stuff with those things not present. If the ECU has to have those things functioning to basically let the car run, then that's where that option is now completely off the table. Yeah. Now, I mean, the positive note is if you have these systems present, then the tuner doesn't have to check or basically do anything with those toggles. And so then the tuning of the car would be, I guess, let's say more normal.
So it sounds like the worst you have to worry about right now, so far in this conversation, is a check engine light being present where there wasn't one previously on the same tune. Your maps that you already have are safe. Your access port is safe. Let's talk about fueling.
Sure.
Flex fuel kits are discontinued from Cobb.
And no longer supported.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a big change. How is that going to affect tunes going forward?
So if you have flex fuel on your car and your car is running now, again, it doesn't affect your current tune. It doesn't affect your access port. That still works. If you have a flex fuel kit in your garage that you haven't installed yet, you're not going to be able to install it and have anybody tune it with an access port now, because now we are post Green Speed update. if you have bigger injectors, those can still be put on and those can still be scaled for post Green Speed update. But it's the flex fuel that is not an option. Now, so let's talk about Delicious Tuning. Delicious Tuning, they have access to Ecutech. They currently are able to run their flex fuel system, or you can get their flex fuel system that runs an Ecutech reflash. But as we kind of touched on in our podcast, Cobb Tuning and Ecutech have the same parent company. They have the same ownership. And Ecutech made a statement shortly after the Green Speed update was done that they are going to have to follow the same standards that Cobb is making, but it's going to take them time to do it. So they don't know exactly when, but at some point within the next 6 months to a year, the Ecutech support of flex fuel is going to go away as well. So I would definitely keep that in mind if you're looking for a quick solution to get your car tuned now, that know that there's a very narrow window where that Ecutech solution is going to be viable for that.
Looking back several years prior to flex fuel being an option, we just talked about this a couple weeks ago about having multiple maps for your car, one with pump gas, one with the 85.
Right.
Is that still a viable option?
That's still viable because there we're just talking about injector scaling, basically like larger injectors and scaling properly for them and then scaling for a different fuel. That's still as viable now as it was before. Yeah. So just running two separate maps, one for pump gas, one for 85.
A lot of people are talking about switching to a Haltech standalone ECU, getting off of Cobb or Ecutech. What are your thoughts on that?
Basically, if your car is a street car, a standalone is not a viable option. Standalones are for motorsports use only, for race cars only. If your car has plates, if you drive it on the street, if it's insured, a standalone is not for you. I wish I could tell you differently, but that is just not really a viable option. Basically, what we have to remember as enthusiasts is if we try and continue to put motorsports parts on our street cars, there's basically going to the enforcement and the changes that are made to affect all these companies that are making these parts is going to basically just go further and further. So if we try and put these motorsports standalones into our street cars, basically Haltech is going to be the next thing that gets shut down.
Another thing we've talked about briefly, tuning for mass airflow versus speed density.
Right.
Is that still possible?
From what we know at this point, it should be unaffected by the Green Speed update. So you should still be able to convert your sewer to run on speed density just as before. Again, it's still early on, but that's like the tuners that we've talked to, and I did reach out to Cobb just to try and ask them about that functionality, and they said that it is unaffected. So that part also should work just like before the update. Yeah, I mean, the encouraging part of that is that basically what it sounds like is if you have all of the emissions devices on your car as it came from the factory, tuning is reasonably close to what it was before. It's not as much of a change. Really, the only significant change for new tunes created after the update is if any of those emissions devices are removed. So if you can do what you want to do to your car and keep those devices in place, the effect should be much less than what it kind of initially seemed or what kind of some of the initial impressions were after the Green Speed update.
Hopefully that answers everybody's questions about the Green Speed update. Maybe the internet can calm down just a little bit. It's not quite so the sky is falling as everybody thought.
There are still options, but that's as best as we can do to give you a current idea of what the tuning options are for various parts in various systems.
If you have more questions, we do questions of the week every week. Submit them in the comments below or hit us up on Instagram.
Thanks very much for watching. We appreciate your support as always. Until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.